This isn't Israel. It's Palestine. Arabs, Arabs, and more Arabs.
זה פלסטין. רואים פה ערבים וערבים וערבים. מה יהיה פה בעוד 10 שנים?
What will happen in another 10 years? How many Arabs will be living here? In 1967, we had a golden opportunity. When we liberated the city, we could have removed them all. They expected us to slaughter them, but there was no need for physical harm. Just transfer. Out. We missed our chance. It was a serious mistake for all generations. Jerusalem, a Jewish city, the Jewish capital. But Jews are afraid to walk here today. In the evening, there are no Jews here. They're afraid. Jews are stoned and stabbed. But the Arabs are not afraid. Tell me, who are the conquerors and who are the conquered here? Will this city be Yerushalayim or Al-Quds? We have to decide now, because time is running out.
Born in Brooklyn, New York City, Benjamin Baruch Goldstein was raised in an Orthodox home. His father, Israel Goldstein, a devout religious man, as well as the mother, Miriam Goldstein. Both had family which had generational lineage, which went back 8 generations to the Baal Hatanya, which was an acronym for Harav Shanur Zalman, the founder of the Lubavitch Chassidus from the 18th century. During the 1929 Hebron riots, which took place in Mandatory Palestine, when some 69 Jews were slaughtered without the British troops interceding, some of those relatives were of Miriam Goldstein. Also, the same year in Safed, where 18 Jews were killed as Arabs rioted throughout Galilee. The conflicts witnessed a total of 133 Jews and 110 Arabs killed. It also ended the Jewish presence in Hebron. Both of the Goldsteins had worked in the New York City Board of Education school district while they lived in Brooklyn. Benjamin, meanwhile, entered the yeshiva in Flatbush, located at 919 East 10th Street. It was the best Jewish school in Brooklyn. There, Baruch excelled in his studies and became enamored with learning Talmudic law. After graduating, Baruch wished to become a doctor and treat fellow Israelis back in his natural home. He enrolled at Yeshiva University, but then transferred to the Albert Einstein of Medicine, where he earned his medical degree in 1981. At around this period, he became affiliated with a known radical Jewish organization, the Jewish Defense League in Brooklyn, led by its founder, Rabbi Meir Kahane. Goldstein knew Kahane well from radio broadcasts proclaiming his prejudices toward Arabs, believing that Israel should be a Jewish home state specifically designed just for Jews. Goldstein did whatever he could to try to help organization out, but he yearned to make Aliyah, an immigration of Jews from the diaspora to the land of Israel. Before his departure, however, he would pen a letter to the editor of the New York Times. It would give the world a glimpse of his extremist views toward Arabs and the devout admiration for the defense of Israeli borders. He wrote, "The harsh reality is, if Israel is to avert facing the kinds of problems found in Northern Ireland today, it must act decisively to remove the Arab minority from within its borders." By 1983, he immigrated to Israel. There, he would live in a home near Hebron in a town called Kiryat Arba, the town of 4. He would also change his name from Benjamin to Baruch. His parents, as well as his brother and sister, would soon follow him in their immigration to the homeland. Kiryat Arba had a special place for Baruch Goldstein. It is prominently mentioned in the Bible as where King Solomon would bury his wife, Sarah. There were also an ominous history here just 3 years prior. In 1980, Three 20-year-old yeshiva students studying in Kiryat Arba were among the 6 Jews killed after praying in the Cave of Patriarchs held on a Friday night. According to an article from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, witnesses at the scene were unaware of an attack until it was too late. Al-Haran Wertheimer was guarding the Hadash building when the attack started. The people were coming back from the Machpelah synagogue via the Hadash building, he said. They were singing Shabbat songs. There were many women and children, but by sheer luck, they were walking ahead of the last group, which included 24 men and 6 girls. As soon as the women and children entered the building and the last group was approaching the gate, the attack broke out, Wertheimer said. Hell was everywhere, he continued. Hellish fire was coming from opposite me. I had no time to return the fire. I was hit, stumbled, and dragged myself into the house where I was given first aid. He said the firing was so heavy and dense that he would not have been able to do much. Everyone outside was hit by the shower of lead and fire. It was hell. The shooters were 4 Palestinians. One of them, Taysir Abu Shineh, was elected to Hebron's municipal council. The 4 charged with the murders were all sentenced to life in prison, but were released in a prisoner exchange later in the decade. During the mid-1980s, Baruch Goldstein would serve in the Israeli army as its head medical officer. He would also meet a Soviet immigrant named Miriam. Baruch's mother was pleased. The wedding was preceded over by none other than Rabbi Meir Kahane. There would be conflicting testimony over the years in regards to Baruch treating Arab Israeli soldiers from the IDF. According to some reports, Baruch declined, even after being offered payment to treat Arab Israeli soldiers, claiming it would be violating his deeply held Jewish theological beliefs. Most Arab Israeli soldiers were Druze. Druze people reside primarily in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and even Israel, and are known to be quite adaptable to any community they lived in. On November 5th, 1990, in a downtown Marriott hotel located on the east side of Manhattan, a gunman wearing a kippah walked up to the table where Meir Kahane was sitting and shot him within an arm's length. Kahane was immediately killed. His assailant was later captured after a short shootout. The assassin was a known Islamic militant, El Said Nosser. He would later be remarkably found not guilty for Kahane's murder. The assassination, however, was felt throughout the Jewish world, more so in Israel, where the nationalist fervor was made during the period as multiple attacks on Palestinians came soon hereafter. Goldstein was crushed by his friend's death and vowed to avenge it tenfold. The Cave of the Patriarchs is considered the second holiest site in all of the Jewish world, after the Temple Mount. It is located south of the West Bank in Hebron. It is known to Muslims as the Sanctuary of Abraham. It is a known tourist site as well. Purim is a Jewish holiday which commemorates the saving of the Jewish people from Haman, an Archimedian Persian Empire official who was planning to kill all the Jews. On February 25th, 1994, the day of Purim, Baruch Goldstein woke up early in the morning. He kissed his wife Miriam and left his house. This day also was the beginning of the Muslim Ramadan holiday. Goldstein picked this day to commit to an act that he felt was not only just his religious duty, but a duty to avenge the death of Kahane. At 5:03 p.m., approximately 800 Muslim worshippers entered the compound to fast and pray. The cave is guarded by Israeli IDF soldiers. Usually there are 9 guards detailed to the area, but on this night, only 4 soldiers were late to their posts, and only 1 was on guard this evening. Goldstein, dressed in his Israeli army uniform and carrying an automatic rifle, an IMI Gali with 4 magazines, a total of 140 rounds and 35 rounds per magazine. He also had hand grenades on his person. As he entered the Hall of Isaac, a secondary corridor after the Hall of Abraham, he witnessed 2 guards. They thought of him as simply an Israeli soldier who was participating in the prayer inoculation. Standing in front of the only exit from the hall, he positioned to the rear of the Muslim worshippers. Goldstein grabbed a grenade from his pouch and threw it to his left. The preceding blast shook the corridor, and the Israeli guards fell to the floor. As soon as the blast had ended, no less, Goldstein proceeded to spray the prayer area with his automatic MII Galilee rifle. Most of the Muslim worshippers were on their knees in supplication and had little time to react to the volley of sheer violence met from behind. There were some worshippers who even said that they saw 2 and maybe a third participating in the shooting, as the shots had not only come just from behind, but also from the sides of the corridor. According to a survivor of the massacre, Hamadi al-Mutasheb, it felt like an unending nightmare. Quote, I turned and saw a settler behind me shooting, and then I was hit from the other side. I don't know who shot me, but it wasn't him. I was shot 3 times in the other side of my body. I couldn't see at all after that, but I could still hear and heard people saying that soldiers had closed the main door so we couldn't get out. When we were in the ambulance, we were stopped at the checkpoint in Biet Umar. The soldiers kept us for a long time at the checkpoint, and my friend, who was also injured, died in the ambulance. It never leaves you. People tell me that I don't laugh anymore, end quote. Fatima Hamas al-Jabari, husband to Suleiman, killed in the violence, quote, my husband and I, 2 of our sons were at the mosque. Men and women are separated to pray. So when I heard the shooting, I just thought about my husband and sons. As the shooting began, my husband tried to cover our youngest son, Sari, who was 8. Suleiman was shot through the back, and the bullet went straight to him and into Sari. My husband was killed. Sari's stomach spilled out, and we thought he would die too, but he survived after 1 month in the hospital, end quote. There were over 120 rounds shot by Goldstein until his weapon jammed during reloading. During this brief moment, someone from the crowd managed to hurl an adjacent fire extinguisher positioned to the west wall of the hall. The furious throw managed to hit Goldstein directly on his forehead as he looked up, knocking him to the ground momentarily. But it was enough for the sparse crowd to manage a final act of vengeance of their own. As Goldstein curled up, numerous men, some even shot by Goldstein just moments ago, beat him in what seemed like an eternity. Goldstein was killed by the mob's assault. His body was left crumpled with multiple broken bones. Kamal Abdin managed to survive the initial assault and claimed that Israeli soldiers afterwards were seen laughing. Quote, the soldiers always searched us before we entered the mosque, and we had to pass through a metal detector. On that day, the machine was turned off, and no one searched us. There were fewer soldiers there than usual, and they were relaxed and laughing. They didn't think anything or anybody was going to get out alive, end quote. After the smoke had cleared, Goldstein's massacre killed 29 people and wounded another 125. Some among them were even children. According to the New York Times, who managed to interview 40 worshippers who survived the attack, quote, all witnesses corroborated that 3 Israeli guards opened fire, likely in panic amid the confusion as the Muslims fled the shrine, with at least 1 soldier firing into the crowd. During the inquiry, an Israeli army official said 3 worshippers died in the stampede following the attack, and 5 Palestinians were killed in street riots within Hebron later that day, end quote. The immediate days after the massacre saw conflicts throughout Hebron. Palestinians began raiding Israeli settler homes and committing acts of arson on farmlands once belonging to Palestinian families who were unduly evicted by the Israeli army just years ago. The Izz al-Din al-Qassam Brigade's Hamas military wing began a multiple suicide bombing campaign that saw a total of 8 Israeli civilians and 55 wounded. 8 killed with 55 wounded in the towns of Afula, a north district in Israel. The vengeful attacks were not only felt in Israel, but also in New York City. On March 1st, a Lebanese immigrant, Rashid Baz, shot at a van full of Lubavitch students on the Brooklyn Bridge. His reason for the assault was in regards to the Patriarchs incident. 1 student was killed, 3 were injured. Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin called the attack a loathsome criminal act of murder, and Palestinian Liberation Organization Chairman Yasser Arafat warned of a very negative backfire on the whole peace process. The tension between Israeli Jews and Palestinians, which would become heightened over the months and years. Meanwhile, many Israeli settlers and members of the ultra-Orthodox movement of the Catch Party defended the actions of Baruch Goldstein. Dor Lavor, the rabbi of Kiryat Arba, warmly urged young Yaakov Goldstein, son of Baruch, to follow in his father's footsteps. He was a righteous man and a great hero. Baruch Marzel, a Koch leader who lived in Lebron, added, "We would have been a lot happier with the whole thing if Dr. Goldstein, a righteous man, was not killed. With him dead, we cannot be happy." The Israeli government appointed a commission of inquiry headed by then President of the Supreme Court, Judge Meir Shangar. The commission, in the epilogue to its report, called the massacre a base and murderous act in which innocent people bending in prayer to make their mark were killed. Among its specific conclusions were that Goldstein acted alone in planning the massacre, telling no one of his scheme. Coordination between the IDF, the police, and the civil administration was problematic. The political leadership and security forces could not have been expected to predict the massacre. Testimony from survivors referring to IDF assistance and grenade explosions in the massacre was found to be contradictory and inconsistent. Investigations did not find any grenade fragments. There were, as claimed by some Jews, seeking to justify Goldstein's actions as a preemptive strike, substantial warnings of a coming Hamas terrorist attack against Jews. Later, critics of the commission had suggested that Shangar's judicial record has consistently displayed his leniency toward the settlers, including those convicted of crimes against the Palestinians, but especially toward the soldiers who had fired at the Palestinians, and that his career reflected a history of pro-settler activism by promoting expropriation of Palestinian land to Jewish settlement that is against international law. In the weeks following the massacre, hundreds of Israelis traveled to Goldstein's grave to celebrate Goldstein's actions. Some Hasidim danced and sang around his grave. Although the government has said that those who celebrated the massacre represented only a tiny minority of Israelis, a New York Times would later report that Israeli government claims may underestimate the phenomenon. In a pamphlet entitled Baruch HaGever, published in 1994, and a book of the same name in 1995, various rabbis praised Goldstein's actions as a preemptive strike in response to Hamas threats of a pogrom, and wrote that it is possible to view this act as following the 5 holiest principles. The phenomenon of the adoration of Goldstein's tomb persisted for years, despite Israeli government efforts to crack down on those making pilgrimage to Goldstein's gravesite. Goldstein's body was buried in the hillside settlement of Kiryat Arba, in which, to the very day, the Hilltop Youth, which is a small clan of radical Jewish religious settlers, celebrate. The Israeli idea has suspended it to dissuade it in becoming a shrine for a murderer. Later on, in the years dismantling the shrine, radical Jewish settlers would settle a Purim by invoking the memory of the massacre, sometimes even dressing up themselves or their children to look like Baruch Goldstein. To some Jews, Goldstein is a murderer. To some, he is a hero. That in itself poses a problem.